One thing that I'm curious about, and I think a lot of people who are been in collecting for a long time or maybe just getting into it, is when you're considering purchasing a piece, what's kind of your priority list there? What are you things to look out for? What are things that are definite no's?
Yeah, so I basically have what I call the watch checklist manifesto. I mentioned it in a Horological Society of New York talk, but it automatically happens in my brain, but it was kind of nice to put it down on a sheet of paper and share it with people. But the first thing you look at is the condition of the watch. Is it correct? The dial is kind of the most important thing generally. The case is critical. I really like unpolished cases. And why do I like that? I like the kind of crisp edges that you can't replicate. I don't mind scratches on a watch. It's old. It should look like it's has a story to tell.
It. Yeah.
But you know, as soon as you start polishing these watches, the edges get soft. Yeah, so I like that kind of aspect of these watches, and it's always a hunt and a treasure hunt basically every day.
And stepping away from watches for just a second, is there anything outside of watches that you collect, whether it's clocks or I see the shoes peeking out of the Instagram posts a bunch? Are you a bit of a sneakerhead, Eric?
I'm not too crazy of a sneakerhead, but I do love sneakers. I do collect watches. I collect sort of horological ephemera, so old catalogs, ads, signs I especially love from stores. Clocks, particularly if they're advertising a watch or somehow kind of related to the watch industry.
Is there a certain brand of clock that you gravitate towards? We spoke with John Reardon before, who obviously is Mr. Paddock everything.
Yeah. I love all brands. I've got one Patek clock. I've got a lot of Jaeger-LeCoultre interesting clocks, from kind of smaller travel clocks to desk clocks and the Sputnik shape to all these different kind of interesting things. Longines. I've got an oversized watch that's basically about this large that was in a store in Norway on a stand that is a working clock, and it was to kind of advertise for Longines. The only other one I know of is in the Longines Museum and doesn't have the stand, so that's something that's cool. It's kind of both a clock and a watch. I mean, I've got way too many clocks, basically. They're scattered throughout my office and desk. I found even pocket watches that are very beautiful with special dials. You can essentially make them into a clock with a small plastic stand, and that's very cool to just have the pocket watch running. It's essentially a small clock.
And on this subject, do you think pocket watches are going to have a comeback at all? I know a lot of people have theorized this sort of thing. Marcho at the Armory, his stance is some things are just too nerdy for a lot of people. Yeah, exactly. What are your thoughts on this whole thing?
I don't think we're going to see a huge renaissance with everyone like wearing chains out of their jackets again, but I certainly love that they're so undervalued, and many of these things are basically just above their scrap gold value.
Complication-wise as well, you can get a whole buffet of them for nothing.
Minute repeaters for under 10K that are spectacular from Vacheron, others. They're just really neat, and I've found I like sharing those with my son Charlie because he likes holding it. It's very tactile. You can learn about watches that way. And it's not as stressful as handing him a 500K watch to look at.
I mean, we haven't hit quite everything here. We have a Zeitwerk, Speedmaster, a couple other Rolex pieces, this Heuer over here.
Yep, so a mix, obviously mostly vintage. I do some kind of more collectible, newer pieces as well. The Zeitwerk is something I just got. Prices have begun to move on these a little bit. It's a tank.
Yeah, is this platinum?
Platinum. It's a beautiful watch. Certainly kind of cool with the history of the opera clock in Dresden. And I'm very happy to see Lange values are beginning to move up.
Yes.
They were in the doghouse for a long time.
Yeah, you were saying there was a time where you could...
A datograph retailed for 110K, the 39 millimeter, and you'd be lucky to get 30 to 35 when you walked out the door. So you can't lose,
Which is not a good thing for a brand.
No. So that's really turned around the last 2 years. the term "a rising tide lifts all boats" I think is the case, because as Jorn values went up, then people were like, "What's the next Jorn?" And they began looking at Lange, and people just began kind of vacuuming up the pieces that were readily available on Chrono 24 and other places. You look now, there's a lot less inventory than there was previously. So yeah, that's one of those kind of collectible rare watches, only 200 made of that model, and all numbered. I also am really into the old Rolex watches with logo dials. So Domino's Pizza.
Which have just come out of nowhere, it seems like. I mean, we have a Honda here.
Yeah, this is probably the only Honda date you'll ever see. It was won at the Honda Bowl 1985 with engraving on the back. We believe that was a motocross event in Florida originally, but that red Honda logo just pops on the dial, and it makes it kind of, something very special and cool.
And there's so many cool stories with those. I mean, what was the deal where, like, I know, like 10 years ago, they were like a nuisance for dealers. They would just have to swap out a dial or something. What was kind of the tidal shift between?
It's a very positive shift, I would say, because people are looking for something a little more unique with a story, a little color that makes it kind of, a lot of people like a little bit of color kind of popping with their watch, and it makes it a little more fun. Like, I absolutely love this Datejust. This is like also a perfect one watch for someone unpolished, early 70s. But, if it had a little red, it would be even kind of more special, I feel like. So that's kind of the story. I think the Domino's, I really like the blue and red. Winn-Dixie has very cool colors I'm really into, and then these are pretty rare watches. They weren't ordering tons of them at the time, so it's neat.
I mean, it's a little piece of history, or someone's history.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everyone gets worked up about, a lot of people feel 34 is too small, but I actually really like a 34 millimeter watch on the wrist. This is a mosaic dial, which is just a beautiful watch. It's got a glossy kind of texture to the dial, but then you see these little blocks almost like building
in the metal,
blocks.
just the way the light hits it is, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and these,
so much
they're
depth.
not common, and they're really not expensive.
And 34 millimeter Rolex is very slept on. In general, I think a lot of people have a hard stop at like even 38 millimeters,
All these people get in their head that even a vintage Datejust is too small for them, and I say, try it on. It looks actually much better than the oversized watch you're wearing. So I think they have a bright future. Vintage Speedmaster, in my opinion, should be in everyone's collection.
And which one is this one?
This is a 105.012-66, but it's got the CB case, so it's got these kind of bevels on top of the lugs. And I really like that kind of, it makes it sit up a little bit higher on the wrist almost. And just a beautiful dial, hands, loom, bracelet, unpolished case, bezel. It's one of those watches that's kind of grotesquely undervalued, under 20K for something with that history, when the modern 321 reissues are going for more than that. I'd rather have the vintage one personally. A lot more character and interesting watch.
They just age so well.
Yeah, and it's just also one of those kind of one watch candidates. You could have a vintage Speedy and wear it the rest of your life happily. A few other watches of interest. I really like the vintage Movado chronographs. This is an M95.
Which have been having their own little moment past couple of years.
They are.
One of your friends, Kevin, at Dated, is a big fan of old Movados.
Yes, and they're just beautiful cases. The very kind of super high quality FB cases, which was Francois Bourgel, also called Taubert Frere. Beautiful pushers, really wonderful in-house chronograph movement. And, this is a fraction of the cost of obviously a Paul Newman Daytona or something like that, but with a similar look.
Yeah, and a good lesson in brand history as well. Obviously, Movado has had a couple different life cycles.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
They're not this is much different than the museum watch.
They're now, exactly. Yeah, but it's just a special thing, and there's so few out there. People don't realize how rare they are.
And a lot of cool details. You'll see the swiggle hands a lot of times. I know it's not a technical term, but
exactly. Yeah, exactly. The Seiko is great. This is the 62 Mas, the original kind of Seiko dive watch from the 60s. I really like these. It's got a big crown, the kind of gray metallic dial, this case shape.
A great example of, I guess this would be like skin diver era.
Yes, yeah, that. And they've just done reissues of this kind of watch and case that are very popular. And these are really not much more expensive than what the reissues cost, or in some cases less expensive for some of the higher end models they have. Again, a lot of these watches are quite worn. The dials with a lot of patina, this dial is essentially perfectly glossy, gray metallic. I think these Seiko sport watches have a lot of upside. They're not that expensive. There's not that many out there in great condition, and they're iconic. So, I would recommend people look at some of these. I love the Pogue chronograph as well. Yep. That's one of my favorite vintage Seiko sports models. And I think they're just a really bang for the buck, some of the best watches you can buy. And then, just a more modern piece. This was done for Revolution in the Rake by Tag Heuer. Certainly a very cool blue dial with the blue segments in the minute register.
Yeah.
Just a great watch. These sell obviously above the original values significantly, but it's something special, and I'm glad to see Tag Heuer doing so well with some of these limited watches. I also love the Hodinkee Skipper a lot.
Yep.
There's some really great values out there, and that's why I brought this array.
Explorer 2 is also on the up and up.
This is a 16550.
I think because everything else is so inaccessible, people are just like, well,
I love these watches.
It's a good watch.
It's really great. This is a very rare 16550, but look at the condition, and the crown guards look different than the later watches. The bezel has this more kind of dynamic numbering, and the lume has aged extraordinarily beautiful.
Yes.
So yeah, these are insanely rare in that sort of condition. I really like 50s Rolexes as well. This, you got to just look at that case, how beautiful it is. It's a 6332 and non-luminous, kind of circa 1953. Just a great watch. And these things are really trade for around the price of a 70s or 80s Datejust, but should be a lot more expensive than they are. I think two-tone might be coming back a little bit.
I think you're right about that.
I like the Rootbeer GMTs from the 70s and 80s. The kind of matte brown, flat brown dial is just so good, and the great two-tone insert. I've really enjoyed getting a few of these recently.
Yeah, and I mean, vintage root beers especially, I think, are one of the better deals as far as Rolex sport watches.
Way less than a modern.
And again, it's just a mental block, I think, for a lot of people about two-tone.
This is 10K plus less than what the second-hand market is on a brand new two-tone GMT, and I'd rather have that personally.
I'd rather have that than the Destro for sure. Never gets old.
I would take that, exactly, over the Riddler.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for coming on, bringing all of these really cool pieces, which are all for sale, by the way. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the industry, very much where we've been and also where we're going.
It's been a pleasure to come to the Chrono 24 offices. put a person to the face I've seen for so long online, and I've really enjoyed the videos you're producing with a wide array of interesting people. So keep up the good work.
Well, thank you. Well, I use your reference points videos for Hodinkee all the time. I listen to your podcast religiously. All your other watch talks, whether it's Instagram Lives or Right Auctions or whatever it is, I gobble them all up. So this has been a dream come true.
Keep killing it. Thank you.
Eric, thanks so much for coming in.
Eric
is the founder of Win Vintage. You can find him on Instagram as well. And be sure to check out his podcast, Significant Watches, for all your watch-related needs. I'm Thomas of 2024. This has been an absolute pleasure. We'll have more videos coming out all the time. And as always, enjoy your watches.